Welcome back. We are at the halfway point of the Women's Candidates 2026, and the race for the World Championship spot could not be tighter. Vaishali, Rameshbabu and Gina are deadlocked at the top on 5.5 points each, with Anna Muzichuk lurking just half a point behind. Every game from this point forward carries enormous weight. Today, we are covering the decisive game from round 9, a clash that could shift the entire standings. Buckle up. Vaishali Rameshbabu comes into this game as co-leader of the tournament, a dynamic and ambitious player known for sharp, imbalanced positions. Her opponent, Divya Deshmukh, sits half a point back and desperately needs a result. Divya is one of India's brightest young talents, known for her fighting spirit and concrete calculation. A win for Vaishali would pull her clear at the top. A win for Divya would make things very uncomfortable for the leaders. White opens with knight to f3, signaling the Nimzolason attack. Rather than occupying the center immediately, White will fianchetto the queen's bishop to b2, building long-range pressure along the long diagonal. This system was championed by Bent Larsen and remains a favorite of creative players who want to avoid heavy theory. The setup is flexible and can transpose into many different pawn structures depending on Black's response. Knight to f3 is White's flexible first move, controlling the center from the flank and keeping all options open. This is the hallmark starting point of the Nimzolason system. Black immediately stakes a claim in the center with d5, the most principled response. By occupying the center directly, Black invites White to commit to a plan and reveal her intentions early. And here it is, b3, confirming the Nimzolason setup. White prepares to develop the bishop to b2, where it will either long diagonal and put indirect pressure on d5 and the kingside. Black develops naturally with knight to f6, reinforcing the d5 pawn and contesting White's influence in the center, a standard and healthy developing move. The bishop comes to b2 as planned, completing the signature Larsen setup. The bishop now radiates power down the long diagonal toward g7, exerting quiet but persistent pressure. Black plays e6, solidifying the d5 pawn and preparing to develop the dark-squared bishop. This is the classical variation of the Nimzolason, choosing solidity over counterattacking ambition. White challenges the center with c4, the key thematic advance in this system. This creates immediate tension against the d5 pawn and forces Black to make a structural decision. An interesting choice, putting the bishop on d6 rather than the more common e7. This keeps options open and prevents the bishop from being hemmed in, though it also blocks the d-pawn's natural support. White prepares to fianchetto the kingside bishop as well, building a powerful double fianchetto structure. This will create tremendous long-range pressure on both diagonals simultaneously. Black castles kingside, tucking the king to safety. With the engine noting this carries a slight swing in White's favor, Black's king now sits on the same diagonal as the b2 bishop, a factor that will matter as the game opens up. The second bishop joins the long diagonal. Completing White's signature double fianchetto, both bishops now point menacingly at Black's kingside and queenside, respectively. Black shores up the d5 pawn with c6, creating a solid pawn chain. This is sensible but slightly passive, and the engine notes a small shift in White's favor as the position becomes more structured. White castles, completing development and connecting the rooks. The position is balanced, but White's fianchettoed bishops give her a rich strategic setup to work with. Black develops the knight to d7, supporting the e5 advance and maintaining the solid pawn structure. The knight is well placed here, though slightly passive for the moment. White strikes in the center with d4, seizing more space and challenging Black to react. The pawn center is now fully established, and White begins to dictate the pace of the game. Black advances the a-pawn, staking queenside space and preparing the possibility of b5 to create counterplay. This is an active try to avoid being squeezed on both wings. White develops the final minor piece, completing her setup. The knight on c3 supports d4 and eyes the e4 and d5 squares, giving White a harmonious and well-coordinated position. Black plants the knight on e4, a bold central outpost. This is an aggressive try to seize the initiative and force White to react, challenging the c3 knight directly. White trades off the centralized knight immediately with knight takes e4. This is a common strategic decision, eliminating Black's best-placed piece before it can cause problems. Black recaptures with the d-pawn, gaining central space. Now Black has pawns on e4 and e6, a compact pawn mass in the center that also slightly restricts White's pieces. White hops the knight into e5, a powerful central outpost. The knight sits deep in black's territory, supported by the d4 pawn and cannot easily be dislodged. Black plays f5, attempting to challenge and kick the knight on e5. This is an ambitious pawn advance, but it does weaken the e6 pawn and the g6 square, creating long-term structural concerns. White responds with f4, boldly locking the center and keeping the knight firmly anchored on e5. Notice that this also closes the diagonal for White's own bishop temporarily, but the strategic benefits of the outpost are significant. Black retreats the knight to f6, trying to reorganize. The earlier ambition on e4 has faded, and now Black must find a new plan while White continues to press. White plays e3, attacking the e4 pawn and beginning to open lines. This quiet but powerful pawn thrust will soon create real problems for Black's pawn structure. Black moves the queen to e8, a somewhat mysterious-looking retreat. The engine flags this as a significant inaccuracy, with the evaluation swinging further in White's favor. Black was trying to support the e4 pawn and regroup, but this loses time and coordination at a critical moment. White plays h3, prophylactically preventing any backrank tricks and keeping options open on the kingside. A calm, unhurried move that maintains the advantage without rushing. Black lashes out with b5, trying desperately to generate queenside counterplay. The engine marks this as another inaccuracy because White can now begin to use the open lines and Black's queenside becomes a target rather than a source of activity. Vaishali plays rook to f2, a multi-purpose move doubling on the f-file and preparing to swing the rook over to support operations in the center. The evaluation now climbs to nearly a pawn in White's favor. Black moves the bishop to i6, targeting the c4 pawn and trying to create queenside pressure. But the engine evaluates this as a genuine mistake, with the swing reaching nearly 2 full pawns in White's favor. The bishop has stepped away from the defense of the kingside at exactly the wrong moment, and White can now launch a powerful initiative in the center. White brings the rook to c1, defending the c4 pawn and preparing to double on the c-file. Every White piece is now perfectly placed and coordinating toward a decisive breakthrough. Black captures on c4, grabbing the pawn, but this is another mistake, opening the b-file and the c-file for White's rooks at precisely the moment when Black's pieces are scattered and uncoordinated. The evaluation surges past 1 pawn in White's favor. White recaptures on c4, restoring material equality, but now controlling the powerful c-file with the rook on c1. The open b-file is also available for White's rooks, and Black's position is beginning to crack. Black retreats the knight to d7, trying to regroup and defend against the threats. But this is a critical error. The engine shows the evaluation swinging by 3 full pawns in White's favor. The knight abandons f6 and now White can execute a stunning tactical sequence based on the knight outpost on e5. White strikes with knight takes c6, a powerful piece sacrifice that tears open Black's position. The knight forks the rook on i8 and the bishop on d8, while simultaneously demolishing the c6 pawn that was holding Black's center together. This is the kind of move that changes everything. Black plays rook to c8, trying to defend the c-file and counterattack the knight, but the engine marks this as yet another mistake, with the swing reaching 3.5 pawns. The position was already very difficult, but this choice allows White to continue expanding with tempo. White advances d5 with force, ripping open the center. The passed pawn marches forward with tremendous momentum, and Black's pieces have no way to coordinate a proper defense against all of White's threats simultaneously. Black plays the knight to c5, trying to find some activity and threatening the d7 square. The engine sees this as another inaccuracy, though the position was already extremely difficult. Black is searching for counterplay that simply does not exist. White centralizes the queen to d4, a powerful move that simultaneously covers the c5 knight, supports the d5 passer, and eyes the kingside. The queen is perfectly placed here, and the evaluation remains firmly in White's favor. Black swings the rook to f6, trying to create some kingside counterplay or at least activate the rook. But the engine flags this as a significant inaccuracy, with another large swing in White's favor. Black's pieces are simply too disconnected to mount any meaningful resistance. White repositions the rook to d2, adding support to the d5 passer and preparing to double rooks on the d-file. Every White move increases the pressure systematically. Black moves the rook to g6, perhaps hoping to create threats against the g3 pawn or activate along the g-file. But the engine sees this as another mistake, with the swing now reaching nearly 4 pawns in white's favor. Black's position is in freefall. White steps the king to h2, a prophylactic move removing the king from any backrank concerns and making room for the rooks to operate freely. Calm and precise defensive technique, even while holding a huge advantage. Black sacrifices the knight on d3, a desperate attempt to generate counterplay by forking the rooks on c1 and f2. But the engine shows this as the most catastrophic mistake of the game, with a swing of over 5 pawns. Black had nothing better, but this hastens the end significantly. White captures the knight with rook takes d3, accepting the material and eliminating the only active piece Black had. The rook is now beautifully centralized on d3, and White's extra material combined with the passed pawns is completely winning. Black recaptures with the pawn, creating a passed d-pawn. But this is another large mistake according to the engine, with a swing of over 7 pawns. The d-pawn is passed but completely blockaded, while White's own passed pawns on c6 and d5 are much more dangerous. White advances c5, creating a monster passed pawn duo on c5 and d5. These connected passes, supported by the bishop on b2 and the rooks, are an unstoppable force. Black has no defense. Black captures on c6 with the rook, taking the knight and winning some material back. But this allows White to recapture with the d5 pawn, creating an even more advanced passed pawn on c6. The engine marks this as a mistake given the enormous swing in pawn advantage it creates for White. White recaptures with the d-pawn, and now a passed pawn sits on c6, one step from queening. The position is completely winning for White, and Black is running out of moves to try. Black moves the bishop to c7, trying to blockade the c6 passer, but the engine evaluates this as another mistake, with the swing exceeding 8 pawns. White has too many threats converging at once for any single defensive move to suffice. White plays queen to d7, a powerful intrusion into Black's position. The queen attacks the c7 bishop and the e6 pawn simultaneously while maintaining control of the c6 passer. Black is completely paralyzed. Black retreats the queen to b8, trying to defend against the multiple threats, but the engine shows another large swing in White's favor, crossing 10 pawns of advantage. The position is utterly hopeless for Black. White activates the bishop to e5, threatening to take on c7 and also eyeing the rook on g6. The bishop joins the attack and Black's position is completely overloaded. Black takes the bishop on e5, eliminating one attacker, but the engine sees this as yet another inaccuracy, as White will simply recapture with the f-pawn, opening the f-file and adding another attacking avenue. The swing is now nearly 11 pawns. White plays rook to b1, threatening to invade on b7 and putting additional pressure on Black's queen. The rook finds an excellent outpost and adds to the overwhelming assault. Black moves the queen to f8, the only attempt to coordinate some defense, but with the evaluation now exceeding +5.5 for White, the result is not in doubt. The engine marks this as another move in a series of mistakes under impossible pressure. White recaptures on e5 with the f-pawn, opening the f-file for the rook on f2. Now the attack on the kingside combines perfectly with the passed c6 and c5 pawns marching up the board. Black plays h5 in desperation, trying to create some luft or counterplay on the kingside. But with White's evaluation now exceeding +6, this changes nothing. The swing continues to grow with every move Black makes. White centralizes the queen to d6, threatening the e6 pawn and combining with the passed c-pawns. The queen dominates the entire board from this position. Black tries queen to f7, the last attempt to hold the position together. But the engine shows another enormous swing as White's advantage climbs past 7 pawns. Divya is fighting on, but the position cannot be saved. And White finishes with rook to b7, pinning the queen on f7 against the king on g8 and combining with the queen on d6 to create unstoppable mating threats. Black cannot avoid decisive material loss and shortly resigned. A clinical and dominant performance by Vaishali. The game was decided by a series of strategic and tactical errors from Divya after White secured the knight outpost on e5 and established connected passed pawns in the center. The move knight takes c6 was the decisive breakthrough, and from that point, Vaishali converted with clinical precision. The two connected passes on C5 and D5 simply could not be stopped, and Divya had no choice but to resign. Vaishali picks up a massive win in round 9 and moves to 6.5 points, taking sole possession of first place at the women's candidates with rounds still to play. The race for the World Championship spot is very much alive. Let us know in the comments who you think will emerge as champion. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and we will see you in the next round.